Good afternoon. Happy spring. My name is Leslie. I'm the MassPAC coordinator at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Welcome to MassPAC's final webinar in our transition series entitled Writing Transition Goals. We're so glad you were able to join us today. I'd like to give you a little background on the Federation for those of you who are new to us. The Federation for Children with Special Needs started in 1974 by a group of parents who are part of a coalition that pushed to get the first special education law in the country passed. The Federation provides information, support, and training to families whose children have special needs, special health care needs, and children who are at risk culturally, linguistically, or economically. Providing technical assistance to special ed parent advisory councils and families going through transition are just two of the Federation's many projects. I will be facilitating the webinar today. It will be recorded and archived later and available on the Federation's website. Just a few technical pointers. Please be advised that everyone will be muted today except our presenter. If you have any questions, please use the webinar toolbox that allows you to type in your questions, and we'll either answer them during the presentation or I'll collect them at the end and we'll try to get them answered. I'd like to welcome today Terry McLaughlin, the Federation's Transition Specialist in the Parent Training and Information Center. She coordinates transition workshops on IDEA relating to transition planning and IEP development for students ages 14 to 22. Terry collaborates with many agencies, including the Department of Ed here in Massachusetts, the Institute for Community Inclusion, Children's Hospital, the Mass Initiative for Youth and Disabilities and Special Health Care Needs at the Mass Department of Public Health, the Boston Public Schools, and the Mass Rehab Commission. We are also very proud that Terry will be presenting at the National Transition Conference in Washington, D.C. later this spring. Welcome, Terry.
Hello, thank you very much. Thanks, Leslie, for that lovely introduction. So nice. We're very excited about being chosen to speak at the National Conference in Washington the end of May. It's a wonderful opportunity for us, and we look forward to partnering with other PTIs across state and other partners across the country. So welcome to Developing Measurable Transition Goals. This is an issue that I think developing measurable goals in general is a challenge for many of us. Families struggle to make sure that they can understand what's happening in school and understand as their children progress in school how they can measure those things at home, and also when they get progress reports, how to understand whether or not they're making progress. So today we're going to walk through the process with you and talk about a variety of different goals that are developed for students, and in particular for students 14 to 22, how they change. But I just want to review a little bit about the webinars that we've already had. One of them was the Transition Planning Forum. Another one was transition assessments. And so I want to make sure that if you've attended those, you've enjoyed those opportunities, and as Leslie mentioned, they're available on the website. So I want to remind you that we're always talking about the student's vision, and vision is a priority, and we always want to keep that in our minds as we're moving forward with students, that the student family vision is a priority. And why is transition important? Transition is important because there's just so much to think about as students prepare to move from school to school activities. So as we look at developing goals, we want to make sure that we're addressing those changes as we go. And transition planning forum we spoke about before was talking about vision, skill-related needs, and how the student is going to move forward and develop IEP goals, and who will support that to do it.
I'm sorry for the pause right now. We're just having a little technical difficulty advancing the slides. So if you do not see the slides training, just hold with us for a moment because it's starting to work. It must be Wednesday. So I'm seeing a change now, and I hope, Terry, it's going to work for you. For those of you who are listening, I'd like to let you know that we do have the two first webinars in this transition series. They're available on the Federation's website. It's listed in the bottom right-hand corner under Media, and you can just click on them, they'll open up, and you'll be able to see the slides and listen to the recorded audio. So I think we're ready to go again, Terry?
Okay. And thank you. I'm back on, I hope. And this was developed by, many of the materials in this presentation were developed by NASTIC, the National Secondary Transition and Technical Assistance Center. And it really is focused on federal law, IDEA, and the importance of compliance and good practices, best practices in schools. So as we look at how IEPs change for students with disabilities at 14, we can look at this graphic and see a little bit how it progresses. We're going to talk about goals for life after high school, and those are called measurable post-secondary goals. As we develop those goals, we're going to address and look at the present levels of academic and functional performance of the student, and then determine transition services, including the courses of study the students are going to take. And from this discussion, we're going to develop annual goals and objectives and address the accommodations and modifications that are going to be necessary in order for students to access that learning. So first we want to talk about writing post-secondary goals. So we're going to focus on each component of post-secondary goal development. So when you think about post-secondary goals, think about after high school, because post-secondary does mean after high school. Like other goals, post-secondary goals must be measurable so they can be countable. We want to know what's happening as we walk through the process in each part of the process, so we can consider the student's needs and we can consider how the student is progressing. Post-secondary goals identify an outcome, not a process. So as we look at the post-secondary goal, oftentimes it's a vision of the student. They want to be this, they would like to do that, and we're going to talk about what they're going to do in order to reach that goal. Typically, there's one goal for each one of the adult outcome areas. So we're looking at instruction and education, employment, some sort of work experience, and then independent living when it's appropriate for the student. A helpful formula to determine and develop post-secondary goals is here on this slide. So when is it going to happen? For each student, it might happen at a different time. It might happen after high school if the student is going to exit school and graduate right after their senior year. It might be after graduation, so that might be for students who are going to stay an additional year or more after their senior year. Or this post-secondary goal might be focusing on their completion of high school, just their completion of high school. So for every student, it's different because the vision for every student is different. Each student is on a different timeline. The timeline is really their own timeline. And so when is the student going to, when are we talking about this post-secondary goal occurring? And who is it for? And obviously in this case, we're talking about the student. So as we look at a post-secondary goal in those three outcome areas, what are they going to do in the area of education and instruction? What is their goal in the area of work and employment, career development? And what is their goal with regard to where they're going to live, how they're going to live, who they're going to live with, and what their community experience is going to be like? So where is this going to happen and how is it going to happen? So we really want to be more specific with each student, as opposed to saying we'll have success. We want to have more clarity around where they will have success and what their post-secondary goal is. So as you think about questions you want to ask with regard to development of a post-secondary goal, think about where and how is the student going to learn or develop skills after graduation. Where is the student going to work or engage in productive activities, which is work or employment? Either it could be volunteer employment, it could be paid employment after graduation. Where is the student going to live, and how is he or she going to access adult services or participate in the community and have fun after graduation? That's a really important thing to consider, because life is full. All of our lives are full of intellectual stimulation and experience with education, and also work is an important part of our life. It gives us access to social networks and work opportunities. And how are you going to live in the community? Who are you going to live with in the community? Are you going to be able to live on your own? If you're going to be able, if you want to live on your own or live in a dorm, what skills do you need to develop in order to be successful in that environment?
Can I ask a question here? When you talk about after graduation, that's when all services end. Is that correct? Is that what that phrase means?
For purposes of our conversation and IDEA, after graduation means exit from school, exit from the entitlement. We're not talking about after senior year. We're not talking about participating in senior activities or even walking across the stage. When graduation is noted in our conversation here today, and actually when graduation is noted on the form, the IEP form, it means one thing and one thing only, and that is exit from the entitlement of special education, which means all services end. And if you think back on the IEP, once on a number of times on the IEP, it stated the expected graduation date. The expected graduation date on the IEP is the date the team expects that the student will exit the entitlement of special education. Okay, so we're going to have a couple of examples here of post-secondary goals. For a young man named Javrin, who will attend Bristol Community College. Javrin's a 19-year-old student, and he has emotional and behavioral disabilities. His interpersonal skills and work ethic are real strengths for him. He's learned those things, work ethic, at home. He enjoys working with other young men, doing different types of manual labor, and he loves listening to loud music when he works. So we're talking now about some of the experience, some of the skills, some of the things that Javrin is able to do, and some of the things that he's good at. He exhibits strength areas in area of mechanical work. Career assessments indicate that he's likely to be a serious and dedicated employee. So his post-secondary goal states, upon graduation, he will attend Bristol Community College and participate in the welding industry certificate program, meeting the requirements to attain an entry welding certificate. So first we want to think about, if Javrin is going to attend the community college, what type of instructional supports is he going to need and access during the period of time he's in high school? So those goals, the goal of attending Bristol Community College, would identify some instructional supports that he would need as transition services in order to access that post-secondary goal. For employment, Javrin, upon graduation from high school, will work part-time as a shopkeeper helper in his uncle's shop to gain industry experience in the automotive repair industry. So that's his post-secondary goal. So we look at that post-secondary goal. We want to think about what type of work supports we would put around him in high school in order to be prepared to do that. These goals meet 1 to 13 standards. Its participation in training and is the focus of this goal. Successful completion of a welding certificate can be observed as Javron meets the requirements of coursework or if he does not. Expectation of behavior is explicit because Javron wants to attain a certificate. So we have to look at some of these things. What work supports will he need in order to be successful? Employment. Independent living. After graduation, Javron will follow the laws of his community, demonstrating an understanding of the need for laws to ensure his and others' safety. So it's important for Javron to understand what the laws of the community are. Javron has been in trouble and has had difficulty following the rules and the laws in the community. And we want to consider this while he's in high school to help him learn to be safe in the community and stay out of trouble. So we want to talk about what supports will we need to build into the IEP to begin in high school to help him understand the importance of his rights and other people's rights and being safe and staying out of trouble. And this is an important thing for many students. You know, there's always concerns and challenges in this process. Accountability is a challenge. Who is going to do it? What's going to happen? How am I going to make it clear in the IEP? And how am I going to be sure that it's going to happen? Students have constant flow of ideas and they have no idea what they want to do. And this is an issue for every family. The rub between families and a student is typical, and it happens with all families. And transition is going to happen for all families. Things are going to change. And families need to understand that, and students need to understand that as they begin to separate from their families and be more independent on their own. It's sometimes frustrating for schools as they reflect on the students' wishes and preferences in the IEP. But we really need to still consider that, and self-advocacy goals and skills can help to address those issues. Parents and families often have a very different vision from the students, and we all need to work on those things. Students will eventually be more independent from their family. No one's ever totally independent from their family, but it's very important for students to begin to stand on their own and understand that their goals and their IEP and their experience in school will help them get there. Some families are not engaged in the process at all, and that makes it very challenging for other families who are very involved in the process. So as families, we all have to consider the needs of all families, understanding that we still have to be there for our own kids. Updating post-secondary goals is a really important part of this process, and it's part of IDEA. Because if we have a goal and we start working towards that goal, and we find that the student changes their mind and decides they don't want to do that, say they start out in some sort of automotive experience, and then once they get in there, they realize, oh, I'm going to be dirty all the time. That's really not what I was thinking about. I wanted to go into some auto detailing or something like that. So their vision changes, their goal changes, and we need to help them to address those things. So the goal needs to be looked at annually. So, and this needs to be clear on the IEP, make sure that assessments have been reviewed, and if additional assessments need to occur to look at a student's strengths or interests, we need to make sure each year that those post-secondary goals are updated and there's data to address that. And when you're updating those goals, this is an example of a good statement and a not so good statement. The first one states, the statement of present level of educational performance, and on the Massachusetts IEP, that is PLEP A and PLEP B. So it can state something like, the student's educational goals beyond high school were considered and they were updated based on transition assessment information in developing this IEP. So that clearly states that there were considerations. It wasn't just a decision of the team that wasn't based on any data. We looked at transition assessment information, and it was important, and it helped us to develop this IEP. To simply state something like the student passed his classes really doesn't tell us anything. The assessment, formal and informal data that was documented in the IEP are 2 or 3 years old. So this isn't really helpful, particularly for students. This time passes by very, very quickly. Students, particularly students 18 to 22, need to look at what they're doing, help to determine whether or not it's useful to them and they're having success, and if they're not having success, they really need to move on.
Terry, we have a question here. These post-secondary goals are written on the IEP document as a separate annual measurable, and the present level of performance for each one of those goals is standardized. So this is just moving the transition planning goal into the IEP, so that's where you would find the transition goals, is in the IEP.
Yes, but we're going to move to that as we look at the post-secondary goal. Is the vision. It's the thing. It's what the student wants to eventually do or be. And as we develop the measurable transition goals, they're going to follow that goal as moving towards that goal, a skill that a student is going to need to learn and access in order to reach that goal. So the goal is really the vision of the student. It's everything you're doing. Say you have a student who wants to be a doctor. Well, he's not going to have to do surgery in high school, but he's going to have to take coursework to prepare him to reach that goal. So with a student on an IEP, it's very similar. The goals in the IEP are based on preparation for life after high school. So what are the post-secondary goals? What is the expectation that's going to happen after high school? And the clearer you can make those post-secondary goals, the easier it is to write in the experience and the skill development that needs to occur as an annual goal. Does that help answer that question, I hope?
Yes.
And I appreciate people sending in questions to clarify this because, for others, because it is a very confusing time. I mentioned transition assessment here because it's important to continually assess a student, particularly if students are not having success in certain areas. Remember that assessments drive the process, and this needs to be updated annually, so we need to make sure that assessments are occurring in a timely way. Remember that they follow the same timelines that any assessment has. A parent needs to make that request in writing. It needs to be completed. Once the parent gives consent, it needs to be complete within 30 school working days. And within 45 days, you should have a meeting, you should have a report, a meeting, and there should be a goal written. Transition services are going to happen. And I just wanted to note that here because it's important to always reflect back on IDEA and the law. It talks about a coordinated set of activities and experiences for a student with disabilities designed within a results-oriented process focused on improving the academic and functional achievement to facilitate movement from school to post-school activities. So as you think about transition services and you think about developing a post-secondary goal, think about for each post-secondary goal, transition services can include instruction, related services, community linkages, development of employment and post-school objectives, the acquisition of daily living skills, and a functional vocational evaluation. Now these are right out of IDEA. So as you think about that post-secondary goal and you think about the things that need to occur and the skill development that needs to occur, think about these different skill areas, and you can find these all in IDEA. The courses study, the time on task, the time in an academic experience is really, really important to students. So you want to make sure that you align the students' post-secondary goals, the courses study with the students' post-secondary goals. It's a multi-year description of coursework to achieve the students' desired post-school goals and the students' current to anticipated exit year. So again, we didn't say graduation year, we said exit year. So remember, you're always thinking about the students' exit from the entitlement and the period of time that they'll be in school and what's going to happen during that time. When you're thinking about a course of study, is there a course of study that's been identified for the student? Is this course of study aligned with the student's post-secondary goals? Always consider the student's learning style, course of study, and teacher methodology. Because that's going to be important to the student now and as they move forward to post-secondary education. How do they learn best? What type of teaching environment works best for them? So now we're going to align annual IEPs or transition IEP goals with those post-secondary goals. So for each post-secondary goal, there must be an annual goal or goals, including the IEP, that will help the student make progress towards the stated post-secondary goal. There should be, remember, at a minimum, one annual IEP goal to support each post-secondary goal.
Can I ask a question here, Terry? So you're taking the work that you've done from the transition planning form and you're going to take that action plan that's developed and then use that to craft the goals that will actually sit on the IEP? Is that the process?
Yes. You're going to look at that action plan, what's going to happen, and this is a team discussion. So what do you want to happen? What does the team expect? Who's going to do what? And that's what the action plan on the transition planning form is all about. And when you think about what are the disability-related goals, what do we have to work on? What is the skill-related areas that we need to work on for the student? That's what you're going to identify as a goal on the IEP. So the IEP, the annual IEP goal states what skills and knowledge must the student attain this academic year that are necessary, why, to achieve the identified post-secondary goal. What are the skills and knowledge that the student currently has that support the post-secondary goals? So begin to think about, as this process and experience evolves, what are you going to write as an annual goal that would help further the student towards that post-secondary goal? And believe me, this is confusing for everyone, so you're not alone. And it's important that you try to understand process because you're going to be doing this every year. So as you talk with your district, talk about process and what is the best way to manage this process for each student, because that will be very, very helpful for you. There'll be components that should be included in each part of the process. So talk to your team about how are we going to have this conversation to ensure that everything happens on some sort of a purposeful schedule. The annual goal in the area of transition that is going to connect to the transition services and experiences that are going to happen. The measurable post-secondary goals, the course of study, and the transition services. So these are everything that needs to be in the IEP. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the annual measurable goal components. We're going to stay basic. We're going to go from measurable goals to a measurable transition goal. But basically, they're all the same. To make something measurable, you need these three goal components. Target behavior, the skill of behavior that needs to be changed or addressed. The condition is the circumstances on which the target behavior is to occur. And the criteria is the acceptable level of performance for the target behavior. So let's go forward and look at some examples of basic measurable goals. For these particular students, it's really a life skill goal. They're looking at a basic life skill goal for Jarrett and Scarlett. So with regular prompts is the condition. Jarrett will use the toilet and wash hands. That's the behavior. How often will it happen? Daily. Now you can see that's really very easy to be able to measure for anybody, for any teacher, even for the student to begin to measure. And certainly mom and dad can begin to measure that at home. So everyone's beginning to understand and measure whether or not that goal has been met. For Scarlett, Scarlett will independently answer yes and no questions by looking up for yes and looking down for no to express two complex choices. Now when you look at each one of these goals in this life skill area, this is going to be useful throughout life for these students. It may be, we may start these goals early. They may be under 14 when we start these goals. But you can see how working on these goals and having success in these goals will move them forward for any type of life experience or work experience. So let's go forward with a little bit more of a transition goal, annual goal, which should be focused on travel training. And travel training is such an important goal for transition. There should be an expectation that everyone is going to travel throughout their community. Every one of us determines where we're going to live and where we're going to work with some consideration for how we're going to get there. And yet oftentimes for students with disabilities, this isn't seen as very important. If you can't get to your job, you're not going to have a job. And we need to think about that. And travel training should be the same as any other goal. You should start out with something local, something easy, maybe learning how to have full access to the school, and understanding a map, to eventually being on a bus, being on a train, or being in a car learning how to drive. But it has to start somewhere. So for these two students, the condition is Monday through Friday, which is the work week. Jillian will use the public transportation system to get to her job placement. So that's the behavior. Use the public transportation system to get to her job placement. And what are the criteria? She will independently arrive at work on time for any 5 consecutive days. So clearly, someone would need to be collecting data so that we could determine whether Jillian is getting to work on time. And when we collect that data and make a determination that she's getting there for 5 consecutive days, she would have been successful in this particular goal. We may need to break down the goal also for Jillian. We'll talk about that in a minute. John will follow the school rules. So this is the target behavior for John, is to follow the school rules, which is somewhat similar to the target behavior we might have for somebody like Javern, who we talked about earlier, who is being challenged following rules. So we might talk about making sure that he understands what the school rules are. As described in the school handbook, every school has their own school handbook identifying what's good behavior, what's bad behavior, and what the rules say. And many of us really are unaware of what those rules are and what the policy is for different types of incidents at school. And the criteria is by walking through the halls without incident. Now, I don't know what John's behaviors are. I don't know what the incidents are. But as we get more individualized to John, we could make a determination and address a specific behavior if we need to do that, and John is struggling with just that simple behavior. So benchmarks are going to break down the measurable annual goal into major milestones that the student is expected to reach within a certain period of time. To help ensure measurability, Benchmarks may also have these three things: target behavior, condition, and criteria. So let's go back to Scarlett. And her goal was she will independently answer yes and no by looking up for yes and down for no to express two complex choices. So we're going to break this down for Scarlett so we can, again, measure even more effectively whether or not this is happening. By the first progress report, Scarlett will answer a reliable yes by looking up 2 to 3 times daily. Now, if this is going to happen, clearly someone must be collecting some data on whether or not this is happening. So make sure that's being collected in some way. By the second progress report, Scarlett will answer with a reliable no by looking down 3 to 5 times daily. By the third progress report, Scarlett will answer a series of yes and no questions to express one simple choice. So this is a good example of how to break down that goal, the larger goal, to make it measurable and individual for a particular student. For Jillian, again, it's a transportation goal. So Jillian, Monday through Friday, Jillian will use the public transportation system to get to her job placement independently, arriving at work on time for any 5 consecutive days. So we're going to break that down with some measurable benchmarks. So by the end of the first quarter, accompanied by an adult, and again, this is individualized, so depending on what Jillian needs, and in this case, we've decided she needs to be accompanied by an adult, she will walk to the bus stop, ride the bus to work, and get off at the correct bus stop. By the end of the second quarter, Jillian will be able to identify the steps she will follow to independently travel to work. By the end of the third quarter, Jillian will independently walk to the bus stop, ride the bus to work, and get off at the correct bus stop. So again, think about the specific student, what they need to learn, what they need to think about, and make sure that the benchmarks reflect what they need to do and how they need to learn. So I want to go back to the law because I think it's always important to reflect back on why it's important to do these things. So we're talking about a results-oriented process. And we think about a results-oriented process, we're thinking about a post-secondary goal. We want to have success. We want those post-secondary goals to be there so that we can design experiences to get them there. And the law says the transition services to get the students there must be designed within the results-oriented process. So that's why this process works that way. A post-secondary goal to the IEP to writing a measurable annual goal to address success or a result for that post-secondary goal that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the child. So it's not just their academic experience, but in Jillian's case, it was that functional experience of learning how to get to work, learning how to get home, learning a functional experience in order to be successful with that post-school goal. To facilitate movement from school to post-school activities, including post-secondary education, again, academics and instruction, vocational training, and integrated employment, which is all focused on employment, continuing and adult education, again, education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. These are all linked. They're all linked for every student. And if we walk through the transition process and we take it step by step, piece by piece, we'll have more time. If we push it all into 1 year or 2 years or 6 months, there's no way you can put in all that functional and academic development for students and really, at the end, have some sort of a result. There's an outcome for everything, but IDEA talks clearly about a more positive expectation, which is a result at the end of the process. It's based on the student's needs, taking into account the strengths, preferences, and interests, which speak specifically to transition assessments. And that's why the transition plan and the transition process needs to be updated annually to take into account that child's strengths, to take into account their preferences, to take into account if they're still interested in what they're doing and it's still following that path to that eventual post-secondary goal. And we need to think about, for each one of those post-secondary goals, instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, and if appropriate, the acquisition of daily living skills and a functional vocational evaluation. Transition services for students may be special ed if they're designed as specially designed instruction, or related services if they're required to assist a student with a disability to benefit from special education. So again, I think it's so important to review the law and the pieces of the law to understand exactly what each part means. The services that support those goals, beginning no later than the first IEP to be in effect when the child is 16, and in Massachusetts we have a better standard, which is much more positive. At Massachusetts we start at 14, which is really great, because I think it really is a transition year for students. Students are moving from a middle school environment to a more structured high school environment where they're going to be asked to make more choices. And it can start younger. For some students, it can start younger if necessary.
I had a question, Terry. When students are starting this transition process planning, and sometimes in middle school, things parents should probably consider is the type of educational setting, that is maybe not just be the public school, might be a vocational school, or there might be some other educational outlets for this student. That's why it's important that transition planning happens right at the transition from middle school, because there are choices for students today.
That's a great comment, Leslie. There are a lot of choices, and that's why the startup in the beginning of this is so important. Students being ready, looking at some sort of portfolio development, or thinking about self-advocacy and talking about their disability, understanding their disability. And then as they begin to understand that better, thinking more about the choices they're going to make and the experiences that they want to have, whether it's academic, sprinkled with some vocational opportunities, or it's all academic because the goal is more of a college, a four-year college experience. But 14 is a really good time to start to think about those types of things and focus the conversation and help students understand what's going to be available in the high school environment. And what's going to happen for students at 14 with regard to transition is very different than what's going to happen for students who are going to stay in school, say from 18 to 22. Their experiences are going to be more focused outside of the school setting, in the community. And assessments might be appropriate that are noted here in the law. Appropriate, measurable post-secondary goal based on age-appropriate transition assessments. What transition assessments might be helpful to help us write those goals and determine those steps and benchmarks in the process that the student has to satisfy. And as you look at those transition services and think of courses study, 14 is a great time to be thinking about, what am I going to take in high school? What type of supports, what things do I need to learn in order to reach that post-secondary goal? The post-secondary goal should be always the thing that's driving the process. Just like the student who wants to be an electrician, that experience while they're in school is preparing them for that post-secondary goal. The student who wants to move into and take coursework at the community college needs to have appropriate academic experience and educational opportunities in order to prepare them for that, even though they might still want to look at some sort of employment skill development so they can maybe work while they're taking that coursework at a community college. So everyone's post-secondary goals are different. For every student who appears to have the same interests, look like, or have the disability as someone else has, everyone's vision is different, and the vision and those post-secondary goals drive this whole process. and beginning at least 1 year before the student reaches the age of 18, we should be thinking about reaching the age of majority. So I think it's a very important thing to reflect on what the law says when we think back about what's going to happen for the student. So, Leslie, I just wanted to check to see if we had any more questions.
Yes, someone is asking, who is responsible for implementing the transition goals in the IEP? Some of these goals might be more independent living, and is the family and the parents responsible for helping the student gain the skills, or is it the responsibility of the school, or is there a partnership? How is that defined in the goal? Is it specifically written in the goal who is responsible for implementing these goals and having the students acquire these skills?
I think that's a good question, and I think that I am asked that question a lot of times. That's why the transition planning forum is so important. The transition planning forum was designed to guide the conversation and to help with the development of annual goals, transition goals in the IEP. The school is responsible for whatever is stated as a goal in the IEP or services to support that goal in the IEP. So when you have the transition planning meeting and have that rich discussion when you're talking about that action plan, and if you remember, in that action plan it notes education, it notes employment, and it notes independent living. It doesn't say on there that anything is the specific responsibility of the school or the parents. And that's mainly our adult agencies, if that's appropriate. And that's because every student is different. Every family is different. And in some environments, family can take on a greater role. In other family environments, families cannot, for a lot of different reasons. So everyone's transition plan is different. Everyone's vision is different. As you go through the transition planning form and you do the action plan on the second page of the transition planning form, it's really helpful when you start talking about what's going to occur with regard to education, instruction, employment, and then community living, that you identify who's going to support the student to learn that skill. In some instances, it will be the school and the parent reinforcing those skills, for example, for an independent living goal at home, making sure that the student is taking some role and responsibility in the home setting for learning those skills. So the parent is reinforcing that at home.
So let me just use an example and see if I'm thinking this correctly. One of the goals might be to have the student establish a bank account, because everyone needs to store money and have access to money. So it might be in the school's goal that they would assist the student in identifying a bank, what type of account they would want, reading the rules of, say, a checking account or a savings account so they would understand, and actually maybe going with them to establish this bank account. And then it might be the role of the family to support that and to monitor the students' use of money and to help them read a monthly statement. So it is a partnership between the family and the school.
It really is a partnership between the family and the school. So for students, for example, who would have a more difficult time with money, we could just use that because you mentioned money. Some students, because they have a more difficult time with money and numbers, may learn how to use a debit card, or learn how to use, for example, a prepaid debit card, which is a really simple way. It's kind of like a gift card that can be used in a variety of different places. A parent could, for example, put $10 or $20 on that prepaid debit card, and then the student could go and buy something at Dunkin' Donuts and not have to even take out any money. They could just use that debit card till it's spent down. And you know, those are two different examples with two different students. One student who is higher functioning and is able to learn how to manage a checking account and understanding more about money and just needs some help with the management of the money, and another student who has no skill at all in the area of money and computing, but still wants to live in the community and access a meaningful, independent as possible experience in the community. So again, if you start these things early on and start to work on money and money management and understanding money, develop some transition goals and some transition experiences and opportunities that will help us learn more about what the student is actually learning, and then in time eventually figure out that at 18 to 22, this is what we're going to do, because this is what the student has tried, this is what the student has been successful with. We've supported, as a family, supported the student at home to do this, and so this is a choice we're going to make. But it is a partnership of everyone. The important thing is that if you have an expectation that the school is going to provide a service or an experience for the student, that it's incorporated in the IEP as a goal. If it is not in the IEP, it is not the responsibility of the school. So I think it's really important to make that case, to have that rich conversation with the team using the Transition Planning Forum, so that eventually we can talk about who's going to do what and how the student is going to eventually meet that post-secondary goal. Always, the goal is always the eventual, I mean, it's a student's vision. It's what everyone is striving for, is that goal. If you haven't identified any post-secondary goals, it's really more difficult to guide the conversation, to guide the experience for the student, and to write those transition goals in the IEP. Is that helpful? I hope.
Yes, thank you. I think also parents can provide a role in bringing observations of the student's behavior in outside of school to the school district. So then that goal is reviewed on an annual basis. They can bring in their observations and their give the school some feedback as how the student is working on a day-to-day basis, because a lot of things happen outside of school, and so that's could be another role of the parent, is bringing data to the school to see how well the student is functioning with this goal outside of the school setting.
Right, that's true. I mean, I think that the assessment component is really important, and it needs to be ongoing. And that assessment can be informal, as Leslie said, from a parent. It could be from the course teacher, because the student is in course taking course and struggling with certain things, and they're observing that the student is able to stay on key or is having a hard time reading the music and the words together. I mean, these are informal observations that would be really, really helpful when developing transition goals. I just want to give a couple of samples here of a possible goal for students and what someone might write for some objectives or underneath that post-secondary goal. And I'm going to make these available to everyone. We'll send you out a link to this list of a variety of different post-secondary objectives that you could add to a goal. So one of them here is with regard to, I have a variety here. One of them is post-secondary education. So the goal is the student will acquire the skills necessary to transition to a 2-year or a 4-year college or university. So a variety of different things that could occur as experience for the student in school. The student will describe their disability in terms of learning strengths and weaknesses. So this would set in a full conversation about what is the student's learning style, what type of teaching methodology works best for them, and would help them to be more independent as they move into a post-secondary setting and have to explain to disability support services what it is they need to support. The student will attend some post-secondary fairs, events, and group discussions provided by the school. So to make sure that the student finds out about different post-secondary options that may be of interest. The student will participate in traditional standardized tests necessary for acceptance to post-secondary institutions. So that would make sure that this particular student, they're aware of the SATs, the PSATs, the ACTs, the various testing that's going to occur, and what is the time frame that they need to be aware of. So if they need support or if they need accommodations for that testing, those things have already been set up and are in place.
One of the things that I've heard is that if a student is considering to go on to some type of 2-year or 4-year college, the guidance department does that. And I think things are different for a student with special needs. They're going to face additional challenges to be able to plan for that, access testing, getting accommodations on standardized testing, and being prepared to be able to self-advocate and access disability services at a secondary school. So I don't think guidance can do it all, and that would be a role of a post-secondary goal for these types of students, is to help them start that process so when they're ready and do access a college type of setting, they have those skills.
You're absolutely right, and that's why the skills and the annual goal and the benchmarks or objectives that are going to fall for the student need to address the specific needs of that student. So if you just think of any student you can think about, and the goal is to apply the skills to successfully transition to a 2- or a 4-year college. For every student it's different. There's one student, as we said, that needed information about those tests, but for other students, and post-secondary education is becoming more and more available to students with more significant intellectual challenges. And whatever they need to prepare for that experience, if that's their post-secondary goal, that needs to occur before they exit school. So it's very, very important to individualize these services and experiences for the student. Although the goal may look the same, the activities and experiences that follow are typically very, very different. So here's another goal for a student who needs organization and study skills. The student will demonstrate organization and study skills in order to participate successfully in academic classes. So for some students, one of the objectives might be the student will complete tasks by following oral and written directions. For some students, they may need more than that in order to be successful. Some students will self-monitor homework by maintaining an assignment notepad that lists all assignments and dates due. For some students, it might be some sort of a technical assistance evaluation in order to get a sense of what they need or what they should use in order to manage their time and their learning. Let me just look at another one. Community participation. The student will acquire the necessary skills to access community with independence and/or other levels of specified support. So for some students, we might talk about learning the skills to access public transportation. The student will register to vote and learn the skills to use a voting machine. The student will identify leisure activities that they like to do in their free time. And around those experiences and around that conversation, you would start to talk about what they need to learn in order to access that experience in the community. For some students, it might be learning how to drive. For other students, it might be learning how to take a bus or some other form of public transportation. For some students, it might be working on their pragmatic language deficit areas in order to be more successful, being able to communicate in the community. For some students, maybe the student will read and follow directions using a map and transportation schedules. So using that type of learning and finding out about restaurants and food might be another goal. But the important thing to remember is it's different for every student. It is very individualized. It is an IEP. It's not a group plan. And the individualization of each plan will make it most meaningful for each and every student.
Terry, I have one more question that came in. The parent here is asking that the school is pushing more vocational types of skill training in junior and senior year, and this parent is thinking that this is really the student's only opportunity to take interesting classes, and couldn't they focus on the vocational skills during the 18 to 22 year period, because this is their only time to be in high school and be with their peers and take classes to kind of develop that vision. How do you do that balance?
Well, that balance is really important, and I think that that's why a transition experience for one 14-year-old may be very different than another 14-year-old. Remember, while you're in high school, every time you give up an academic class, every time you move into a vocational experience, you're giving up an academic class. While students are under IDEA, on an IEP, in special education, it's the only time in their life when they'll have that level of individualized, specialized support in order to access an academic experience. Reading is a life skill. Math is a life skill. These things are going to be very, very important for students as they move into the community. So don't give up an academic experience too soon. When you go into a vocational opportunity, you're going to give up some sort of academic experience. Now, I'm not telling anyone what to do. I just want you to know that you can have either of these things at any point in time, and you can balance that. Again, the assessments may help you with this in order to give you some guidance and information about the specific ability and strengths of the student. What do we need to work on this year? What is the goal this year? And remember, don't give up that academic experience too early for some sort of a work opportunity. Balance it and make it ready so that the day before you exit school, the day before you graduate and exit the entitlement of special ed, is just like the day afterwards. The only difference is the level of support might be different, and the responsibility for payment for that support is absolutely going to be different, and you should know about that long before you exit school.
Our time is about up, Terry. I'd like to thank you so much for really helping us think about how to write practical, measurable transition goals for our students. It's been a wonderful series, and I really hope I can convince you this fall to do another 3-part series for transition, because this is a very important learning process for parents and students that affects their whole life. So thank you so much. I'd also like to thank the Federation's IT Director, John Sullivan, who's facilitated this webinar, and for all of you who've joined us and sent great questions. Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.